This is Agent Provocateur with Alan Walsh and Adam Wilde.
Welcome to the 83rd episode of Agent Provocateur. I see Adam Wilde. How are you, Adam?
You know what, Alan? I'm pumped to be here for our 83rd anniversary show. It's a big one. 83, huge.
It's a big one.
So, Alan, I got to ask you, man. I mean, like, listen, 83. What's your favorite moment to date?
I don't know if I have a favorite moment. There've been some awesome guests on with some that I've really enjoyed. Really enjoyed having Steve Yzerman and Doug Armstrong on.
They were
I
great.
thought those were really strong episodes where we talked. We had some great conversation, revealing, insightful, analytical conversations. I think having Ken Dryden on was amazing, and his passion and advocating for a safer game really struck home. And I think having Chris Nowinski on was a very memorable episode for me as well. From players, David Perron to kick off Agent Provocateur, Marc-Andre Fleury, Jonathan Huberdeau, Sean Dursey, great Max Pacioretty, great episodes.
I have to say, I owe your friend Doug Armstrong an apology, as I think a lot of Canada does, because Doug and the management group, 14 Canada for the Four Nations tournament, decided, listen, it's going to be Jordan Binnington. We're going to give him a shot in the first game. If he does well, he's going to play the second game, and so on. And Alan, I have not been a big Jordan Binnington believer, but sometimes you realize, hey, I don't know everything. And after he made
really,
it's crazy, right? It's crazy. But after he made those saves in the final, I am in OT. I mean, I am a believer. Doug Armstrong somewhere is probably laughing and going, haha, I told you all. And rightfully so. I have to ask you, because, you're a Canadian living in the States. What was it like for you seeing, marquee ESPN shows like First Take lead with hockey? And it's more than just, Stephen A. Smith saying, all I know is about hockey is that the puck is black. Like, that's his big famous line, right? He's talking. They spent half an hour on Thursday and half an hour on Friday talking about hockey. Pretty unbelievable.
Right. Well, first of all, the new slogan for Canada should be "Binner is a winner."
Yeah, I like that.
that. But let's go to your question or observation. I was hearing from people, friends of mine, longtime hockey fans, friends of mine who were not necessarily longtime hockey fans. I do have a few of those. And everybody was captivated by this tournament in a way that I haven't seen in hockey in a long, long time. People telling me that they were standing in an outdoor bar near the beach in Cabo, and there were 200 people watching the big screen TVs, standing and watching the game and yelling at the screen. People in Hawaii, people in the Caribbean, people all over, people in Europe, staying up into the middle of the night to watch these games in bars. So the purpose, one of the purposes, the bigger purpose of a tournament like Four Nations or World Cup is to bring the game to people that are not necessarily daily hockey fans. And this tournament did that and then some, right? There were so many people watching the game, like, who's that player? What's that player? What's his name? What's his background? There was a hunger to learn the backstory of these guys who are now going to tune into NHL games, who are now following the most compelling part of the NHL season, the last 25 games and playoffs. So this tournament has sparked something that we haven't seen in hockey in a long time. Energy, enthusiasm. The entire tournament brought a certain amount of creativity and ingenuity back to hockey. Hockey is hot. And maybe it hasn't been this hot since 1994-95 season. Actually 1994 through 93-94 season, where the Rangers won the cup and Sports Illustrated had that infamous cover, the NHL is hot and the NBA is not. And it was ironic that the NBA All-Star Game was such a dud and had so many fans complaining about it at the same time that hockey was surging. Haven't seen that since then. The NBA became ingrained in American and many would say world culture from Dream Team and and Jordan and some of those iconic moments. Here we had the most of the sports world and many people outside the sports world captivated by a Four Nations final between Canada and the US in OT, with a storybook ending for Canada, but it was drama. It was excitement. And, you felt it, Jesse we all felt it. And what a great time for hockey.
Well, and politically charged too. We'd be completely ignoring it if we didn't put that angle in. And I think, one of the reasons that made the 1972 Canada Cup so important, not Canada Cup, the Summit Series. Yeah. What made that such a huge thing at the time was the democracy versus communism thing, right?
It was a Cold War. Yeah. It was a Cold War showdown.
Yeah. Yeah. And it went to the eighth game and all that. And the reason I said Canada Cup is in 81, the Soviets won the Canada Cup with Gretzky and Lafleur and Bossy and all these great players on that team. The 1987 Canada Cup was a massive one, Allan, as I'm sure you remember very well. Yeah. And Canada obviously won that one. These are there's something about
1976, the first Canada Cup. Right. Darryl Sittler.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Maple Leaf great.
That's right. Coming down the wing and scoring on Vladimir Zarilla.
Yes. Wow. You remember the goalie. Wow. Well, and this is the thing, Allan, like we will talk about, this might be the only time we see that Four Nations Cup ever given out. Right. And I actually want to talk to you about the future of this because they seem to have hit on something. Obviously the politics played something in this, but anytime you're playing for your country, everybody gets behind it. Everybody gets behind it. It's exciting. And the politics and the booing of the anthem and all that stuff played into this and supercharged it. Hockey is hot. How do they jump on this and ride it? First off, obviously, I know in the near term, we've got the playoffs coming, and that's always a great season for hockey. NHL playoffs are incredible. They always have been. Next year, we have the Olympics. But we also have an All-Star game on Long Island. And the All-Star game format, just the general idea of it, whether it's NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL, is an old-style format. They've been doing All-Star games since the 40s and before. It seems like it's a tired format in pretty much every sport. Is there any way that it continues in the NHL beyond 2026?
I would argue that we should do away with the All-Star game completely.
Okay.
I mean, the All-Star game started with the Stanley Cup winner actually playing a game against a group of NHL All-Stars. In the 1970s, the All-Star game meant something, and players actually hit and competed in the games. And there are some pretty I wouldn't say it was compelling hockey, but you had all the NHL stars on the ice in the 70s, and they were okay games. They were decent games. And then it became a joke. Right. And the fans hated it, and the media hated it, and the NHL tried to tell us, how great it was, and it wasn't. It sucked. So I think that every year, whether it's an Olympic year, no All-Star game, let's play the Olympics without an All-Star game, whether it's a World Cup year, every 2 years in between. And I think for those other years, the NHL should consider either some kind of a in-season tournament, like what the NBA has tried
in November, right? They do the November thing, yeah.
Some kind of a Ryder Cup tournament where you can do North America versus the world.
Oh, I like that.
We can be creative and put people in the room on both sides, the players in the league, and come up with something a hell of a lot more compelling, interesting, exciting than the tired old all-star format. If they go back to that and start that up again and do the same old format, like you said, just another lost opportunity, like the last 10 years of no best on best in the NHL has been a tremendous lost opportunity to the game, leaving millions and millions of dollars on the table for everybody.
And you know, Allan, it was funny. I saw your tweet about that. Once, you know, obviously once the dust had settled, it was like you said something to the effect of, I mean, we could have been doing this the whole time. This could have happened. This could have happened multiple times. It wasn't like it was that hard to organize it. Even if they hadn't gone to the Olympics, they could. And
they asked Gary pointedly, like, why haven't we done this in 10 years? Right.
And what did he say?
And he blamed the NHLPA. And it's hilarious that revisionist history now is like, well, we didn't have a partner like the NHLPA that we could have worked with like we do now. What a cop-out. What a cop-out. The players desperately wanted to go to the 2018 Olympics, and Gary was the one, and he's quoted widely on video, in print, saying the owners don't want to shut down the season for 3 weeks in the middle of our year. The owners are against it. The league is against it. We've gone there. We've done that. It hasn't grown the game at all. It hasn't done what they said it was going to do. And we don't want to do it. What Gary was doing was leveraging the NHL players' participation in international hockey to try to get something out of the players in collective bargaining. And this is not a blackmail issue. This is not a CBA issue to blackmail the players over. There has never been a time when the players didn't want to go to the Olympics or didn't want to participate in a World Cup. Yeah. Ever. The players are hungry and have been yearning for this for the last decade. So don't sit there now and say, oh, the players didn't want to do it or we didn't have anybody to work with on the other side. Not going to the Olympics and not having best on best in 10 years has hurt the league, has hurt teams, has hurt the game just as much as it has hurt players.
Right. And so to that point, there were a lot of players on the outside looking in. I think they showed David Pastrnak at one of the games at Boston Garden, right? He's there in a white t-shirt watching, dying to get on the ice. If they were to do something like this again, and let's say for a moment that the situation between Russia and Ukraine is resolved, and I'm going to try not to get overly political on how I think that should be resolved. But let's say that the war is over in that part of the world. I know that Luc Tardif from the IIHF wants to let Russia back in and Belarus back in to international hockey as soon as that's done. Do you think the NHL would jump at a chance at something like a Six Nations where you have the Czechs and you have the Russians involved? Or, something along the lines of like a Team Europe and Team Russia? What do you think?
Well, the agreement that has already been announced, and they announced it during the Four Nations, the NHL and the NHLPA, Gary and Marty Walsh in a joint media availability have said there will be a World Cup in 2028, and it will be 8 teams.
Okay.
Okay. They didn't say which teams, but they said it will be 8 teams, and it will be a World Cup, and it will be another week of hockey, as opposed to limiting it to just 2 weeks, 4 teams. And they're for sure it's on the table to play part of these games in Europe.
Which is amazing, I think. I think you need that, right? If you're going to grow. That's the point, right? It's to grow the game.
I mean, you can have these games in Paris. You can have these games in London. You can have these games in Berlin, the economic, financial, business centers of Europe. And in addition to the NHL has gone many times and played games in Helsinki and Stockholm and Prague. And I'm all for that, right? As long as that's not your entire international strategy. Let's go over, play a couple of games and disappear for another year, which is what they've done in the past. But to take the games to Berlin, London, and Paris, now you're going to be able, I guarantee you, those cities will be hockey crazed during those games, just as they are when there's a World Cup in other sports playing there.
Right.
And people from all over Europe will be traveling in to see those games.
So what do you owe the cooperation between the NHL and the NHLPA to? Because, Gary did say, well, and listen, I'm not saying that we got to trust him at his word on that comment, but there does seem to be overall, on both sides, it used to be very, very at each other's throats. Now it seems like they're working together on at least finding common ground on things that they can work out. What do you owe that change in relationship to, do you think?
I think there's definitely a change of tone, a realization that on the league side, that instead of continuously trying to fight the players and to bash their heads in at every single opportunity, whether it's collective bargaining or other issues outside of collective bargaining, that it's much more beneficial to the league to get along.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that now. And I think Marty Walsh's approach has been the right approach. It's not about forgetting the past, or living in the past. You need to be educated and aware of everything that has gone on in the past. But the players truly wanted a leader who would step forward and be willing to do business with the NHL and not approach from the player side the relationship in a confrontational manner. Mm-hmm. That's what the players wanted, and that is what they're getting in Marty Walsh, and that is the appropriate way to go. Nobody in this sport should be fighting for the sake of fighting for no reason. And nobody should be trying to fight battles that have been long either lost or waged in the past. That's over. And you have to turn the page on all that and move forward, right? That doesn't mean you roll over on key issues. No. It doesn't matter you don't fight and advocate for players and what's in their best interest, either safety issues or economic issues or whatever there is that's on the table. But you can do it in a approach of, we are in this together. We're going to negotiate through the difficult areas, but we are going to work together in every area that we can possibly work together in the best interests of the overall game. And that's what the players wanted, and that's what they're getting.
How do you have any sense of how much, if any, negotiation got done at the Four Nations? Because obviously there were rumors that Marty and Gary were going to sit down with their respective groups and try to work on this CBA that they're hoping, I think, to have announced by June.
Yeah, I do have a good idea of what happened and didn't happen, and I'm not going to talk about it right now.
Okay. Great. I love it. And Allan, I on a personal note, because I want to get the new stuff out of the way, but you're a Canadian and you've lived in the United
American.
States. And an American. So
I was born an American citizen.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
My mother is American.
Yeah.
And while I was born in Montreal, when you're born to a female American citizen in 1965, in those years, you're automatically considered a natural born American under the U.S. Constitution, even though somebody's trying to change that right now. And I was, from a very early age, a holder of a U.S. and Canadian passport.
There you go. So my mom's an American as well. Although born in Edmonton, she was raised in Pittsburgh. And so
then you're American.
I am American. Yes. Yeah. I haven't fully got my citizenship papers in order and that sort of thing. Mostly because I don't want to pay the American empire tax, to be honest. But it just makes my taxes more expensive. But I always hold a little candle to the United States for the United States because, most of my family on my mom's side lives there, is there, and that sort of thing. And is in no way a reflection of where the government's at this point. Right. Let's just be honest.
Okay.
But I am a Canadian guy. I've made my living here. We've started our business here. We've grown here, and this country has given me so much. Allan, you're a Canadian and an American, but a Canadian who grew up here, moved to the States. When you saw the Connor McDavid goal go in, how did it make you feel? Because there's been a lot of talk about expat Canadians who have kind of forgotten what it's like to be Canadian, making a lot of comments politically, and perhaps, I don't want to get too much into the political debate between, who people vote for. That's for them. But did you feel that little rise of patriotism? Were you cheering? Where were you watching from? I want to know how it was for you.
So the hardest thing for me over all the years is to watch an NHL game. And, people say to me, like, do you have a favorite team? Do you root for this team over this team? Who do you want to win? And I've always said, I don't root for teams anymore. And I haven't for the last 30 years. I root for players, right? The players that we represent. And my kids going with me from a very early age to Kings games all the time. All their friends are LA Kings fans. They're all decked out in Kings jerseys. They're going to the game. Many of the times we're going to LA Kings games and I'm representing players on the other team.
Right.
And my kids grew up with those players. Right. So They did not grow up LA Kings fans because they're always going to the games and they're not wearing a Kings jersey and they're not rooting for the Kings because Marc-Andre Fleury's in nets on the other side. Or, that's the reality of the situation. But I can tell you that one of the most memorable hockey memories of my entire life is the 72 series. Mm-hmm. And I still tear up and get misty-eyed watching highlights from that series and watching Paul Henderson score that iconic goal in Game 8 with 34 seconds left in Luzhniki Arena in Moscow, right? So to answer your question, I was jumping up and down, and I am glad there was no video on me because I'm fist pumping in the air, yelling, "Yeah, baby," and jumping all around the room when that goal went in at the Four Nations.
I love it. That's beautiful. And you know what?
Just don't tell anybody.
I won't say anything. So was it a nice switch for you to cheer for a team?
It was.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, it was honestly, it brought the fan out in me that hasn't come out in a long time. I love the game. I respect the game. I live the game. It's my lifestyle. but I have to separate fandom from the business side of the game.
Of course.
Right. And I shamelessly confess that Four Nations, I was allowed to become a fan again. And it was wonderful.
I love that. I love hearing that. Okay. And so,
and not just me. Let me tell you something. I was talking to the wife of a very high profile NHL player, 2 days ago. And they were having a birthday party during the Four Nations final for their son. And during the birthday party, the player was standing in front of the TV with a bunch of the other parents of kids who had come to the party, and we're all yelling at the TV.
Oh, that's awesome.
So and she was telling me the story laughing. She's like, here he is, he plays in the NHL. It's his son's birthday party and he's standing in front of the TV, yelling, go, 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 go during the game.
That's awesome. And you know what that is? That's why I think that's why we all love the game. It's that kid in us that kind of comes back out again. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Allan, we are going to have to switch gears here to a little bit more of a serious topic. And you mentioned off the top of the show, Chris Nowitzki, who you work with a lot on concussions and CTE related issues. And one of the major things that you're trying to get done is you're trying to get the NHL to just recognize that CTE, playing hockey can lead to CTE.
Yes.
And another player who has passed away was revealed to have had it. And right now, unfortunately, the only way to prove that someone has it is posthumously after they've passed away. And this player was a pretty significant guy, and that would be Bobby Hull. And I want to preface this by saying, and I'll be honest with you, Allan, Bobby's got a checkered history, right? There are a lot of people who are like, I don't care about Bobby Hull. He said this and he did that. And, all the articles are out there on the internet about Bobby Hull. You can go look them up. I don't need to repeat them here. But I want to say that this goes a little bit deeper than what this person said or did, correct? Like this is a little bit more of what happens to your life when your brain deteriorates and the decisions that you make. Am I incorrect in putting it in that way?
No, that's exactly it. I mean, he's a 2-time Hart Trophy winner, Stanley Cup winner, one of the greatest players of his generation, and certainly in the conversation for one of the top 10 players of all time, right? The Golden Jet. This is not a comment in any way or reflective of anything that has been said or done off the ice. This is about an iconic player who played many years in the NHL, one of the legends, one of the superstars of his generation, and his brain was found to have stage 2 CTE. And there's an interesting backstory here. Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita, teammates and tremendous friends, lifelong friends from the time that they played together with the Blackhawks. And here we are. Stan Mikita went through some very rough years near the end of his life. With dementia, Alzheimer's, and it later turned out that he had CTE. And Bobby Hull said to his wife, on my death, I want to donate my brain to the Concussion Legacy Foundation, to Boston University Medical Center, a CTE center. I want to donate my brain. I want it to be tested. As a way of honoring Stan Mikita's life and supporting him and what he went through. And that was how Bobby Hull's brain ended up getting donated and examined for CTE. And ultimately, we know now the results, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the Boston University Center, 18 of 19 former NHL players' brains have tested positive for CTE. 18 of 19, right? In the NFL, the numbers are over 300. So the question is, how many more? Mm-hmm. And the other question is, how at this point, with definitive studies that have come out, mm-hmm. right, over the last decade, with all of the new cases of CTE that have been discovered in hockey players, in former NHL players, NFL players, soccer players, Navy SEALs. Mm-hmm. There are a number of soldiers who have had their brains donated upon an early death, and there's findings of CTE, significant CTE in their brains caused by the concussion of artillery and bombs and grenades that go off that send waves towards your head that rattle your brain like a body check or a punch or a head impact blow to the head would occur. How can Gary Bettman today deny there is an association or link between repetitive head impacts and CTE? It is undeniable. And the most disheartening aspect of it all to me is I heard Gary Bettman the day of Four Nations interviewed on NHL network radio, the day after the Bobby Hull news came out, and he's not asked about it. And he goes and he constantly is doing interviews, TV, radio, all with rights holders or people, and he's not asked the question every single time. How can you deny that CTE, hockey causes CTE? How can you deny it today, now, in 2025, with all that we know? He said for the better part of 15 years, we need more studies. The NHL refused to participate in any of these studies. It was all done without the NHL. The NFL funded studies. The NIH, everybody got involved in funding studies, and we have the results of those studies. And it's definitive. Mm-hmm. And after all these studies are done, now he just doesn't answer the question. Right. So I would like to see if the media wants to take a stand in standing up for players. Anytime you have Gary Bettman sit down in front of you, and we know who the people are who've interviewed him, who haven't asked the question, and every time you do that, you lose respect, integrity, and credibility. Ask the fucking question.
What do you think the chances are? We're in legacy time for Gary, right? This is legacy time. He's going to retire soon. It's already out there. What are the chances he admits it before he retires?
I don't know. If he wanted to do the right thing, he would come out and say, the studies are there now, and there is a link, and hockey does cause CTE, and we now need to take the next step, which is working on prevention. Right. Right. And helping the guys who've played the game that are struggling and suffering through this now, which is treatment. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be prevention, treatment, better equipment, and the NHL needs to be involved in that. Helmets that do a better job of protecting player brains. And there's been some work done in that regard, but that is where this needs to go. But it all starts first with Gary Bettman admitting what we all know to be true and to stop denying the undeniable. And I think if you want to talk about Gary's legacy, I think that he's going to ride off into the sunset after this round of collective bargaining. So I could see Gary turning the reins over and retiring sometime in 2026. Good riddance. Good fucking riddance. And I think ultimately his 32, 33, 34 years running the NHL will be remembered for his 3 lockouts. It will be remembered for his CTE denial. And it will be remembered for the fact that, right now the NHL is a $6.6 billion industry. It should be 12. And it would have been 12 with somebody more competent and more focused and caring about the game, running the game, through the, 90s, 2000s, 2010, 2020. This game is so compelling. This game is so exciting. This game can be so much further ahead than it is right now. Yes, hockey is hot. Yes, hockey is in. Yes, hockey is growing by leaps and bounds, but it's all been in spite of Gary Bettman, not because of him.
Right. So Allan, switching gears again to our third topic, and this is an interesting one, and I know people love this show for this because nowhere else you're going to get an agent's perspective, nowhere else, and you go into a thing like trade deadline, and I think everybody wants to know. You've got free agents that are out there that could get traded. So, like for instance, today. The Boston Bruins were having a dialogue about where they're going with their season, and it looks like they're going to retool. Nobody wants to say rebuild, retool. But Brad Marchand for them, he's their captain, emotional heart and soul. They don't have him on an extension. He could get traded. Mikko Rantanen, traded from the Avalanche to the Canes. Rumors are that, hey, listen, the Canes could deal him if a deal doesn't get done by the trade deadline, or they could keep him and go, you know what, forget it. We're going on a run with him anyway because he's here. There's so much excitement. And I want to talk to you about what it's like to be an agent right now, especially as on your roster of players, every year, there's a few guys that become available because they're either out of contract or the fit isn't there with the team, or they're a young asset and they're going to get traded by their team that wants to go to the Stanley Cup. What's this time of year like for you?
It's a busy time. It's a time that I both enjoy. You get a lot of work done. You got a lot of business done. Like you said, there's guys who are in the last year of their deals, and now is a window to negotiate and get deals done before the deadline. And teams then have to make decisions. Are they in it? Are they still close enough to make it where they're going to go for it? Are they going to risk losing a player for nothing at the end of the season? Are they going to ignore contract status, play out the year, and try to sign the player before July 1? That happens a lot. So it's a time when decisions get made. There's a lot of dialogue going back and forth. It's already started. Yesterday, I probably talked to a dozen GMs, and I met face to face with the GM before the game yesterday in LA, and I met with the GM after the game yesterday in LA. So, and everyone's talking about how it's work mode now. It's back to work mode. Everybody's back from Four Nations. The GMs that were there are now focused on their own teams. Guys that were off and had a little bit of a break are now back, and it's back to moving guys on your board up, down. This guy's out. This guy's in. Let's sign that guy. And that's what's going on right now.
And a bit chaotic. And so I thought it might be a good time for you to tell a story that I think you've been meaning to talk about for a while, but for whatever reason, we just haven't chatted about it, of how chaotic these negotiations can get and some mistakes that happen along the way. And this is just one example. And I think we're going to not name anyone because we want to protect the parties. But what happened with the text message situation? There was a text message.
So it was a couple of days before the deadline several years ago, and I was negotiating back and forth with a team over a pretty high-profile player, and the assistant GM of this team was the point person in the negotiations.
Okay.
And
how often does that happen, by the way? I'm sorry to interrupt, but
very often. Very often.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some GMs that nowadays they like to handle negotiations on higher profile players on their own. Some teams, the GM will handle all of their veteran players, and the assistant GM will handle all the entry level. Mm-hmm. There are some teams where the assistant GM handles all negotiations, and the GM is very much in behind the scenes. Obviously, he's making the decisions. He just doesn't want to be involved in the day-to-day back and forth. He'll leave it to an assistant GM. Maybe the assistant GM is a former agent who has a lot of experience negotiating and likes to negotiate. But it varies, but it's certainly not abnormal or strange or not done in many other clubs as well. So we had been going back and forth for several weeks, and we had talked a few times that morning, and we were probably 48 hours from the deadline. And they were saying at the time, if we don't get a deal done, your client will very probably be traded. So there was a deadline, and you know what I've always said about deadlines.
Clear the mind.
And we had talked maybe 3 times in 15 minutes, and it's me and the assistant GM talking, and then I talk to my client, and then I come back and speak to the assistant GM, and I get off the phone and I call my client, and we're texting back and forth, and then a text message pops into my phone, and I read it, and it didn't it took me a while to register what it was I was reading, but it was a screenshot of a text message that the club's owner had sent to the assistant GM saying, I want you to offer now X dollars, X years. I have a hunch about this. Follow what I'm telling you, and then continue to lay out the entire club strategy and where they were going with this offer. Okay. And then saying, we know, this isn't where it's going to end, but this is where we will go in the next couple of days. But this is going to show some initial movement on our part. And then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go there. And
so they gave you the numbers.
And he sent it to me. Right? And his text message was addressed to the GM.
Oh, no.
So the owner sent this text message to the assistant GM. The assistant GM screenshot it and meant to flip it to his GM and accidentally sent it to me.
Oh my God. Did he know? Did he go, hey, this wasn't meant for you? Or did he acknowledge it? Or what do you do as an agent in that instance? You have the cards. What now?
About 5 minutes after I received the message, he called me.
Okay.
And he said, I guess I really fucked up. And I said, well, yeah, that's one way to term it. And he goes, I appreciate it if you keep it quiet. And I said, I don't know what you mean by keep it quiet. I'm not going to tweet it or publish it at all, but I have an obligation to share it with my client. And he goes, yeah, I figured you would. And I said, well, I will, because I will never keep a secret or keep anything confidential from a client. The client knows everything the moment I know it.
Yes.
I said, and we'll go from there. He goes, well, you kind of already know where our final number is and what our final term is. Why don't we just go there right now? I said, we could, and we ultimately got a deal done. But that's just a unique, interesting story of something that actually happened behind the scenes.
And the thing about these negotiations is that, everybody in the room is high priced. The player's high priced. Ideally, the agent's high priced and doing well. The AGM, the GM, everybody is, but we're still human beings and mistakes happen.
Let me tell you something. Since that happened, and I was always super paranoid before that happened, and certainly afterwards, to take a deep breath before hitting send. And when you're in the throes of a negotiation, sometimes you're dialoguing simultaneously with the player, sometimes also with the player's wife, sometimes also players' parents, and a GM, assistant GM, owner. You've got a lot of different people involved dialoguing with simultaneously. July 1, sometimes it's multiple teams at the same time. I always take a deep breath, look at my message, look at who it's going to before hitting send. Because once you send that sucker, there's no getting it back.
There you go. Allan, that's awesome. So the next couple of weeks are going to be busy for you, but I know we're going to sneak some shows in as well. Do you look forward to the day after trade deadline when things kind of calm down a little bit? Is that the first, you're probably going to be running like crazy from now until then. Do you get a breath of fresh air right after that? Like March 8th, is that going to be a relaxing day for you? Or is it just kind of crazy from now until, early July?
I don't think I've had a trade deadline where a client or two have not been traded. And trade deadline for me is it's a melancholy time where players that do get traded, first of all, everybody's nervous. Everybody's on edge. I have players calling me, with no move clauses. Like, are you hearing anything about me? I'm like, you've got a no move. You can relax. if there's anything going on, we'll be the first to know, not the last, but, it's a sad time where players get traded and all of a sudden their lives get blown up. And, sometimes they're, married with kids and kids are in school, and all of a sudden it's, hey, 2 p.m. flight to your new club city or meet your team on the road. And, their lives get thrown into turmoil. It's what they signed up for. I'm not looking for sympathy. I don't want anybody to start playing the violin. I'm just stating a fact that it is a very difficult, emotional time. Teammates say goodbye to teammates that they love playing with, and great friendships that develop over the years. Maybe a player's been in a city for a long time and he loves the city. You lay down roots. You've got, family. You've got, great friends. You've got a way of life. And all of a sudden, all of that gets blown up. And now you're living in a small hotel room and, getting a rental car, and you're away from your family, away from your kids. I've hear the stories, and I'm part of it, where, kids are crying, saying goodbye to daddy. So that's really what trade deadline means to me. There's a human element to it. I've always, been a little, you see deadline day made out to be entertainment. And, TSN deadline show, it's entertainment. Everybody's trying to get the scoop on the trade 20 seconds before it's announced. and somehow that has value, in our world, to be able to break it 20 seconds before the tweet hits Twitter, and then get the player on the phone and have his photo on the screen with him being interviewed by the guys on the desk. And it's sport, it's entertainment, and I get it. There's a lot of fan interest in their clubs, and their clubs are getting better and going on playoff runs, and there's an excitement to it. But to me, it's really all about the human side of all of this behind the scenes. And it's a incredibly stressful time for players, for their families, an incredibly stressful time for me.
There you go. Allan, it's a different perspective. I'll be honest with you. Our network does bill it as entertainment, and it is from our perspective. But this is why I think this show is so great, because I look at the conversation, and again, this is not a client of yours, so I'm not expecting you to comment on them directly. But the Carolina situation with Mikko Rantanen is interesting because they make a big splash for a big name potential free agent this summer in hopes that they try to keep him, right? And they give up assets that are under contract, really good players that they developed for 10 years in their system, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on. And that's really taking a risk. And I think the way people have reacted to Mikko Rantanen and not re-signing in Carolina so far has been very interesting, because he has said, I need time to process. And I think that some people don't take that very seriously. I think that some people look at that and go, oh, come on, get over it. They're going to offer you $100 million. You got to make a decision. You got to make a call. That processing time for everybody is different. And I think you probably, Allan, could speak to, because with your clientele, you've seen it happen. It's going to take more than a few weeks for him to process this, contract or not. Sometimes it's like a breakup, right?
Sure. And Mikko's represented by Octagon, by our agency, by Andy Scott, one of my colleagues. So I want to be very careful not to in any way speak about his specific situation. But I've been in this similar situation with other players in the past. And if you look at an elite player approaching free agency, any player, and there's other players out there right now as well. This isn't directed at Mikko or about Mikko or Carolina at all in any way. But we know for the first time in a long time where the upper limit of the salary cap is going for the next 3 years.
Yes.
And it's going up significantly year after year after year, to the point where in 3 seasons, we're going to be, in the 114, 115 million range, right? From where we are today, 88 going to 95.5, wink, wink, maybe 97. We'll see. So I think that any team with that player now, having the rights to the player on the last year of a deal, is there an advantage with that team today over any other team in the league? I think the player now can sit and say, I know there will be 10, 12, maybe even 15 teams interested in signing me July 1. Right? Like, he's got a lot of options.
Yes.
Right? A player in that situation has a lot of options. And the one area that the team that holds the rights to the player now, what they have that other teams July 1 don't have, is 8 years versus 7 years.
Right.
Right? And I just think that if a player is coming off a deal, making a significant amount of money already, and is looking at one of the most lucrative AAVs in NHL history, are they going to choose a team 8 years over 7 years? Is that going to be the deciding factor?
Mhm.
Or is it going to be what team will give me the greatest chance to win? What city do I want to live in?
Mhm.
The tax structure of the city that I would be in. And at the end of the day, you can sign for 8 years over 7 years. But if the taxes in a certain area are higher where you sign than where you could go, your net pay over the 7 years may be pretty comparable,
Right.
and negate that 8th year, right? So there's a lot of things to consider. And something like that would go through any player's minds in discussions with their agent and their financial team around them, approaching any kind of a deadline or approaching July 1.
Is there a world in which, because that is an advantage for the signing team, right? If you are re-signing a guy, you can go to the 8th year. Whereas a lot of teams, when you get into free agency, you can only go 7, right? So, a guy that might be, there's a lot of talk about Mitch Marner in Toronto, right? He's out of contract at the end of the season. If he signs in Toronto, even if some other team offers him $500,000 or even $1 million more a year, it's going to take a while to make up that extra money that he would have made on that 8th year over the course of a 7-year contract. Or do you think with the cap rising the way that it is, that we start to see players take the NBA route, which is what happened when their cap exploded, which was, you saw guys like LeBron signing 1 and 2 year deals that were sort of rolling. Hey, I'm going to stay with this team, but I'm going to sign 1 year because I know next year it's going up another 15%, and I want to take advantage of that. Or do we see somebody go, all right, July 1st, I'm signing where I want, but I'm going to sign for 1 year, and then January 1st, the next year, I can sign my big, long extension. Do you think those are possible?
That's exactly where we're going. Okay. You're going to see top NHL players signing for 1 and 2 years, because the only reason players in the past were signing for 7 and 8 years was financial security. Right. And if a player is already making, I just had this conversation with the GM, NHL GM yesterday, who said, pretty soon, we're going to be, and he said it in a positive way. He says, I can't wait for the first $20 million a year player in the NHL. Like, good for that guy. Like, I'm proud that the players are getting there, and I'm happy. And he's a former player, right? And he's rooting for the first $20 million player in the NHL.
Yep.
And, if you're making, 17, 18, $20 million a year, you're not selling 8 years of your career to a team for financial security. You already have it, right? So now you can take that out, which really negates the need to go long term. Mm-hmm. And you can say, you know what? Great group of guys. We're going to try to win here for the next year or two. But in 2 years, I get to go back to the market. And number one, with the cap going up year after year after year, likely get more money.
Yep.
And that's what's happened in the NBA.
Yes.
Right? With the
Without
cap
question.
jumping, guys got more money doing short-term deals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's certainly a motivator. But also the ability where if things are going well with the coach, things aren't going well with the direction of the team in any way, you get to go back to the market and make another choice.
So do you see there being a lot more maneuverability, a lot bigger trades, bigger sign, kind of like what the NBA has? The NBA trade deadline is bonkers. It's crazy, right?
Bonkers.
The NHL one has been, certain years it's been good, certain years it's been sleeping. Do you see it being a little bit more like, oh my God, I can't believe this is all happening?
What you've seen in the NHL is the quantity of the deals have varied a bit from, quieter trade deadline to a lot of deals, but you don't see franchise players being dealt at the NHL trade deadline.
Yes. And
you do see that in the NBA, right? And you have in the past. And that's what makes it bonkers. And I think that with players on shorter term deals, the likelihood of seeing younger franchise type players being involved in deals at the deadline, much, much more likely.
Wow. All right, Allan Walsh. Well, I'm very excited. It's going to be an exciting couple of weeks. As we all know, trade deadline is literally 2 weeks away, which is kind of crazy to say. I can't believe it. 2 weeks from now, we're going to be all the way through it. And Allan, I know we're going to squeeze some shows in. I don't know when, but we will figure out some shows before trade deadline and, of course, right after it. And I hope that you have, the time in between our shows. I know it's going to be crazy for you, but I hope you have a good couple of weeks.
You got it. I'll be sure to see you guys next week.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wilde. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.